Marble columns gleamed in the late afternoon sun as Centurion Marcus Antonius Severus stood alone in his sprawling villa. Victory laurels adorned the walls, but no laughter filled the rooms. Outside, Rome celebrated his triumph while inside, emptiness echoed. His calloused fingers traced the cold hearth, symbol of a home without warmth. Across the city in the shadow of forgotten monuments, Livia Aurelia knelt before a simple grave, her once fine stola now threadbare. The same battle that had made him a hero had made her a widow. She placed withered flowers on stone, unaware that watchful eyes had found her. Could two souls damaged by the same war heal each other's deepest wounds? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The streets of Rome overflowed with celebration as Marcus rode through the triumphal archflower petals rained down from balconies, and the crowd chanted his name with reverence reserved for conquering heroes. His armor gleamed in the midday sun, polished to perfection for this moment of glory. Yet behind his stoic expression, Marcus felt nothing but exhaustion. As he dismounted at the Senate steps, his hand instinctively fell to the broken gladius at his side, the sword that had saved his life when it caught a Dacian blade meant for his heart. The weapon had shattered, but the fragment remained his most treasured possession. Not for its value, but for the reminder of how thin the line between life and death truly was. "Smile, Marcus." Quintus clapped his shoulder with familiar ease, his fellow officer's face flushed with wine and pride. "You're the hero of the hour. The emperor himself has taken notice." Marcus managed a rigid nod, his eyes scanning the jubilant faces for one that might understand what truly weighed on him. He found none. "I've arranged a feast at my villa," Quintus continued, oblivious to Marcus's discomfort. "The finest wines, the most beautiful dancers in Rome. You deserve to celebrate properly." "Perhaps another time," Marcus replied, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. The journey was long. Quintus's smile faltered but quickly recovered. Still the same serious Marcus. "Very well, but don't spend tonight alone with ghosts. They make poor company." If only Quintus knew how accurately he had named Marcus's true companions. At night, when sleep finally came, the faces of fallen men visited him, Romans and Dacians alike. Some nights, it was the young Dacian boy soldier whose throat he had cut during an ambush. Other nights, it was the men from his own century who had followed his orders into a valley that became their grave. The crowd parted as Marcus made his way toward his villa in the hills, a property inherited from his father that had stood empty during his 5-year campaign. Servants had prepared it for his return, but as he pushed open the heavy wooden door, the silence struck him like a physical blow. "Welcome home, Domini." His steward Titus bowed deeply, a man who had served his family since Marcus was a boy. "The house has been maintained as you instructed." "Thank you, Titus." Marcus removed his ceremonial helmet, feeling the weight lift from his neck if not his spirit. "Has there been correspondence?" "Several scrolls from the Senate, invitations to various celebrations, and—" Titus hesitated. "Your mother's sister has written 3 times regarding suitable marriage prospects." Marcus sighed. "Of course she has. She mentions the daughter of Senator Claudius specifically. A political match that would—" "Enough." Marcus raised his hand. "I've spent 5 years following orders. Allow me one night before planning the rest of my life." Titus nodded with understanding that came from decades of service. "A bath has been prepared, and a meal will be ready when you desire it." Left alone, Marcus wandered through the atrium where marble busts of his ancestors stood in silent judgment. 3 generations of Severi men stared at him with stone eyes, all of whom had married well, produced sons, and died with their family line secure. At 35, Marcus remained unmarried with no heir. His father's bust, the newest addition, seemed to look at him with particular disappointment. Marcus turned away and continued to his private chambers where he removed his armor piece by piece, revealing the scars beneath. A map of battles survived while others perished. Later, as night fell over Rome, Marcus stood on his balcony overlooking the city. Celebrations continued in the streets below, distant laughter and music drifting up the hill. In his hand, he held the broken gladius, turning it to catch the moonlight on its fractured edge. "Was it worth it, father?" he whispered to the knight. "All this glory?" The sword gave no answer, but somewhere in the distant reaches of the city, a woman knelt at a grave that might have been filled by Marcus himself, had fate turned differently. Neither knew that their paths would soon cross, connecting lives broken by the same war that had made one a hero and left the other with nothing but memories. Dawn broke over the Subura district, where Rome's glory faded into cramped tenements and narrow alleys. Livia Aurelia woke to the familiar sound of her elderly neighbor's cough through the thin wall. She rose from her pallet, her fingers automatically finding the worn bronze wedding bracelet on her wrist, the last gift from her husband before he marched east with the legions. 3 years had passed since the official messenger had arrived with news of Gaius's death. 3 years of learning to survive alone in a city that had no place for war widows except in the shadows. "You're up early, child?" Cassia called as Livia passed her door. A clay pot of water balanced on her hip. "The herbalist in the forum pays double for chamomile collected before the sun is high," Livia explained, pausing to check on the older woman. "How is your chest today?" "Better, thanks to your remedy." Cassia smiled, revealing missing teeth. "You should have been trained at the temple of Asclepius. Your hands have healing in them." Livia offered a small smile. Before marriage, her father had indeed arranged for her to study healing arts. But those plans ended when her family lost their modest fortune. The marriage to Gaius, a promising young soldier from a good family, had been her father's last effort to secure her future. Neither man could have foreseen the war that would leave her destitute. The morning air carried the scent of baking bread as Livia made her way toward the city walls where wild herbs grew in abundance. She kept her eyes down, avoiding the gaze of men who might see a woman alone as an invitation. Her once fine stola, mended countless times, still bore the quality that marked her as someone who had once known better circumstances. There she is, the soldier's widow who thinks herself too good for honest work. A woman's voice hissed as Livia passed a tannery. Livia quickened her pace. The tanner's wife had been spreading rumors since Livia rejected the advances of the woman's brother. The implication that she should sell her body rather than struggle honestly was not new. Beyond the city's edge, Livia knelt among the wild chamomile, her practiced hands gathering the small white flowers. Here, away from judging eyes, she could breathe freely. The open sky and distant hills reminded her of her childhood home in the countryside, before death and debt had brought her to this crowded corner of Rome. By midday, her basket was full. She sold most of the herbs to the merchant who supplied wealthy households, keeping a portion for her own remedies. The coins she earned would buy grain for the week and perhaps a small piece of cheese, a luxury she permitted herself rarely. As she did every 7th day, Livia used a few precious coins to purchase a small bundle of wildflowers before making her way to the cemetery where Rome's common soldiers were buried. Unlike the grand mausoleums of patricians, this section held simple markers, many already crumbling into anonymity. Gaius's grave was distinguished only by the small stone carving of a wolf, the emblem of his legion, that Livia had commissioned with money saved over months. She knelt before it, removing withered flowers from her last visit and placing fresh ones in their place. "The chamomile is plentiful this season," she spoke softly, maintaining the ritual of conversation that kept him present in her life. "I've been teaching Cassia's granddaughter which plants heal and which harm. She has a quick mind." A shadow fell across the grave, and Livia tensed, her hand instinctively tightening around the small knife hidden in the folds of her stola. But it was only an old cemetery attendant who nodded respectfully before moving on. He knew her by sight now, the faithful widow who never missed her weekly visit. As the sun began its descent, Livia reluctantly rose to leave. The dangerous streets of the Subura grew more treacherous after dark. "Until next week, my love," she whispered, touching the worn wedding bracelet. Walking back through the forum, Livia passed the grand houses on the Palatine Hill where Rome's wealthy lived in luxury. Lanterns were being lit in windows, and the sounds of evening entertainments drifted down. Laughter, music, the clink of wine cups. A world as distant from hers as the moon. She didn't notice the man watching from the shadows, a centurion who had come to visit his father's tomb. She didn't see how his eyes followed her slender figure with curiosity, noting the dignity in her bearing despite her humble clothes. She couldn't know that fate had already begun weaving their lives together through the invisible threads of a shared loss. Marcus woke before dawn, as years of military discipline had ingrained in him. For a moment, the soft bed and silk coverings disoriented him. No tent canvas above, no sounds of men preparing for march. Then reality settled. He was home, the war was over, and the silence was deafening. He rose and walked through the villa that had been in his family for 3 generations. In the east wing, his father had collected scrolls from Alexandria and Athens, creating a library that scholars occasionally requested permission to visit. In the west wing, his mother had once maintained a beautiful garden atrium before illness took her when Marcus was just 16. Now, dust motes danced in the shafts of early morning light. The villa was maintained, yes, Titus saw to that, but it lacked the essence of a home. No children's laughter had ever echoed through these halls. No wife's touch had softened its austere beauty. "You're awake early, Domini?" Titus appeared silently, as was his custom. "Shall I have the cook prepare something?" "No, thank you," Marcus replied, pausing before a row of ancestor busts in the main atrium. When was the last time anyone used the dining room for an actual gathering? Titus considered. Your father hosted the Senators' Council 2 months before his passing. That would be 7 years ago. 7 years. The revelation struck Marcus like a physical blow. This grand house, built for family and fellowship, had stood as little more than a mausoleum for 7 years. "Perhaps it's time we changed that," Marcus said, more to himself than to his steward. "Indeed, Domini." Titus hesitated before continuing. "If I may speak freely?" Marcus nodded. "A house such as this requires a mistress. Your position now, after your triumph, would allow you to make an advantageous match. Senator Claudius's daughter is of age, educated, and would bring connections that would serve you well if you have political ambitions." Marcus studied the elderly steward's face. "And what do you know of this potential bride?" "She is said to be quite beautiful," Titus offered. "And that is all I have heard mentioned about her." Titus looked uncomfortable. Marcus turned away to hide his grimace. A beautiful ornament for an empty house. How fitting. Later that morning, a messenger arrived with formal invitations to 3 separate celebrations in his honor. Marcus accepted them with proper gratitude, though the thought of more public adulation made his stomach tighten. Still, he understood the political necessity. A successful military man had obligations to maintain his standing, especially one with no family connections through marriage. As dusk approached, Marcus found himself restless within the villa's walls. He changed from his formal tunic into simpler clothes that wouldn't mark him immediately as a man of wealth or position. Sometimes anonymity was the greatest luxury. "I'm going out," he informed Titus. "Don't wait up." Titus looked concerned but knew better than to argue. "Be cautious, Domini. The streets are not as safe as they once were." Marcus patted the dagger hidden beneath his cloak. "I faced the Dacian hordes, old friend. I believe I can manage Roman cut purses." The night air carried the scents of the city. Cooking fires, animal dung, incense from temples, human sweat. Marcus walked without particular destination, enjoying the freedom of movement without a century of men at his back awaiting orders. Ordinary Romans passed him without a second glance, a welcome change from the constant attention he received in his official capacity. His wandering brought him to the cemetery where his father was buried. The caretaker recognized him despite his plain clothes. "Centurion Severus." The old man bowed slightly. "It has been some time." "Too long," Marcus acknowledged, realizing with shame that he hadn't visited since before his deployment. "Your father's tomb is well maintained, as you paid for," the caretaker assured him. "Would you like me to show you?" "I remember the way," Marcus replied, placing a coin in the man's weathered hand. As he walked among the graves, The setting sun cast long shadows across the stone monuments. In the distance, he noticed a solitary figure kneeling before a simple marker in the section reserved for common soldiers. A woman in a worn but once fine stola, her head bowed in prayer or remembrance. Something about her posture, dignity despite apparent poverty, caught his attention. She placed flowers on the grave with such tenderness that Marcus found himself unable to look away. Her quiet grief seemed more genuine than all the elaborate mourning rituals he had witnessed among the noble families. The woman eventually rose and departed, unaware of his observation. Marcus continued to his father's grand tomb, the contrast striking him profoundly. In death as in life, Rome maintained its rigid hierarchies. That night, as he lay in his vast, empty bed, the image of the solitary woman remained with him. There was something in her quiet devotion that spoke to him more deeply than all the celebrations of his triumphant return. A week passed before Marcus found himself drawn back to the cemetery. He told himself he was going to properly pay respects to his father, bringing fresh flowers purchased from a vendor near the forum. In truth, he found himself hoping to glimpse the solitary woman again, though he couldn't have explained why her image had lingered in his thoughts. The late afternoon sky threatened rain as he passed through the cemetery gates. The caretaker nodded in recognition but said nothing, accepting the small coin Marcus offered. As if fate had arranged it, he saw her in the distance, the same woman, kneeling at the same grave, her profile illuminated by the fading light. Marcus made his way to his father's tomb, but his attention remained fixed on the woman. She spoke softly to the grave, words he couldn't hear but could somehow feel in their intimacy. He found himself wondering about the soldier buried there. A husband? A brother? A son? The first heavy raindrops fell without warning. One moment the sky was threatening, the next it opened in a sudden deluge typical of early autumn. The woman rose quickly, looking around for shelter as the rain soaked through her thin clothing. The nearest structure was a small mausoleum belonging to a merchant family, its door ajar. Marcus watched as she hurried toward it, then found himself following as the rain plastered his own clothing to his skin. Inside the mausoleum, Livia pressed herself against the wall, trying to minimize her intrusion into this family's sacred space. The sound of footsteps made her turn, body tensing with instinctive wariness as a man entered. Their eyes met in the dim light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier despite his civilian clothing. The scar that ran along his jawline confirmed her assessment. "Forgive me," he spoke first, keeping a respectful distance. "I didn't mean to startle you. The rain." He gestured to the downpour outside. "It's not your forgiveness I need, but theirs," Livia replied, indicating the stone sarcophagi around them. "I doubt they expected visitors." A slight smile crossed the man's face, surprising in its warmth. "I think they welcome the company after so much silence." The unexpected response eased some of Livia's tension. Still, she remained cautious. A woman alone with a stranger, even in a cemetery, invited certain assumptions. "I've seen you here before," he continued. "You tend a grave in the soldiers' section." Livia's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been watching me?" "Not intentionally." He seemed embarrassed by the admission. "I was visiting my father's tomb last week." "Your devotion stood out." "My husband," she said after a moment, deciding honesty was safest. "He fell in the Dacian campaign 3 years ago." The man's expression changed subtly, a shadow crossing his features. "I just returned from Dacia. I was a centurion there." The revelation hung between them. This man had commanded men like her Gaius, had perhaps given orders that sent soldiers to their deaths. Had he been Gaius's centurion? The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with her rain-soaked clothing. "Which legion was your husband with?" he asked quietly. "The 10th Gemina." He nodded slowly. "A brave legion. They held the left flank at Tapi." "You were there." Livia couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I was." His reply was simple, without the boasting she had come to expect from soldiers recounting battle stories. The rain hammered against the stone roof, filling the silence between them. Livia shivered involuntarily as water dripped from her hair down her neck. Here, he removed his outer cloak, still mostly dry, and offered it to her. Please. She hesitated before accepting, pride warring with practical need. The fine wool was warm against her chilled skin. Thank you. She realized she didn't know his name. Marcus Antonius Severus, he supplied. The name struck her with recognition. The hero of Sarmazegetusa? The one they celebrated with a triumph last week. He looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the title. The same, though I take little pleasure in the honor. His discomfort seemed genuine, confusing Livia, who had only known soldiers proud of their accomplishments. Before she could respond, he spoke again. And you are? Livia Aurelia. Your husband's name? Gaius Aurelius Nepos. She watched his face carefully. Did you know him? Marcus searched his memory, honest in his effort. I commanded many men. The name is not immediately familiar, but, of course, Livia interrupted, a bitter edge to her voice. He was just one of many who died. Why would you remember? Marcus looked at her directly, his gaze steady. Each death weighed on me, whether I knew their names or not. I don't forget that my triumph was built on their sacrifice. Something in his tone made Livia believe him. The rain began to lessen, and light filtered through the mausoleum door. The storm is passing, she observed, removing his cloak and offering it back with murmured thanks. As they stepped outside into the damp afternoon, Marcus was struck by how the rain had revealed the true color of her hair. Not the dull brown it had appeared at first, but a rich auburn in the emerging sunlight. May I walk you home? He asked, then quickly added. For safety only. The streets can be treacherous after rain. That's not necessary. Livia's guard returned. I've managed alone for 3 years. Marcus nodded, accepting her refusal without argument. Then may I ask when you visit next? Perhaps I could bring flowers for your husband's grave as well. A soldier's respect. The unexpected offer surprised her. Why would you do that? He considered his answer carefully. Because no one should be forgotten, especially those who gave everything for Rome. Livia studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. Finally, she said, I come every 7th day, near sunset. Until then, Livia Aurelia. He bowed slightly, the gesture of respect one would offer to a woman of standing, not a widow in threadbare clothes. As he walked away, Livia found herself watching his retreating figure with confusion. Of all the men she had encountered since Gaius's death, this decorated centurion was the last she would have expected to show genuine respect. For 3 consecutive 7th days, Marcus appeared at the cemetery with flowers, not just for his father's tomb, but a small bundle for Gaius's grave as well. Each time, he and Livia exchanged brief words, their conversations gradually lengthening as her initial suspicions slowly gave way to cautious acceptance of his presence. On the 4th visit, as they walked together along the cemetery path, Marcus finally gathered the courage to speak the words that had been forming in his mind for weeks. Would you meet me tomorrow? At the fountain near the Temple of Vesta at midday. Livia paused, wariness returning to her eyes. For what purpose? I have a proposition I wish to discuss, he said, then seeing her expression harden, quickly added, a respectable one, I assure you, in public with witnesses all around. She studied him for a long moment. What kind of proposition would a decorated centurion have for a soldier's widow? One that might benefit us both, he replied carefully. Please, an hour of your time is all I ask. Against her better judgment, curiosity won out. Very well. Midday tomorrow. The next day, Livia arrived at the fountain precisely at noon, her best, though still threadbare, stola carefully mended for the occasion. She spotted Marcus immediately, his tall figure distinct even in the crowded forum. He had dressed simply again, avoiding the attention his military regalia would have drawn. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. I said I would. Livia kept her tone neutral. What is this proposition? Marcus gestured to a stone bench near the fountain. Once they were seated, a respectful distance between them, He removed a set of wax tablets from a leather pouch. "First, I should explain my situation," he began. "As you know, I've returned to Rome after 5 years away. I have a position, property, and now some measure of fame I neither sought nor enjoy. What I lack is—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "A home." Livia looked confused. "You have a villa on the Celian hill. A house, yes, not a home." Marcus stared at the fountain's flowing water. "My father is dead, my mother long gone. I have no siblings, no wife, no children. The house stands empty despite its grandeur." "And what has this to do with me?" Livia asked, though she was beginning to suspect. Marcus turned to face her directly. "I need someone to manage my household. A respectable woman who can oversee the servants, maintain order, and accompany me to certain social functions when required." The bluntness of his statement caught Livia off guard. "You're offering me a position as your housekeeper?" "As the mistress of my house," he clarified, "with all the respect and authority that entails." Livia's eyes narrowed. "And what would be expected of me in return for this position?" Understanding her implication, Marcus shook his head firmly. "Nothing improper. Separate quarters would be yours. My proposal is one of mutual convenience, not the other arrangement you might suspect." He opened the wax tablets, revealing neatly inscribed terms. "Everything would be formalized and witnessed. You would have your own allowance, protection under my name, and security you currently lack. When I must travel, the house and staff would remain at your disposal." Livia took the tablets with disbelief, scanning the detailed provisions. The arrangement he proposed was indeed proper on its surface, unusual, but not scandalous if handled discreetly. "Why me?" she finally asked, the most important question. "Surely there are dozens of well-born women whose families would eagerly connect them to your household through marriage." Marcus's expression darkened slightly. "I have no interest in political marriages to women I don't know, who see me only as a stepping stone to status. You—" He paused, measuring his words. "You understand loss. You maintain dignity despite hardship. And you have no illusions about glory or war." Livia set the tablets down, struggling with conflicting emotions. The practical part of her recognized the lifeline he offered: an escape from grinding poverty, from the constant fear of illness or injury that would leave her truly destitute. Yet pride and caution held her back. "People would talk," she said finally. "They would assume." "People always talk," Marcus replied. "But we would know the truth. And if I refuse, then we part as acquaintances who respect each other. I continue to bring flowers to your husband's grave when I visit my father. Nothing changes." The sincerity in his voice was convincing. Livia looked down at her worn sandals, then at the fine marble of the fountain, symbols of their disparate worlds. "I would be able to continue my healing work?" she asked. "I've included provisions for that." Marcus nodded toward the tablets. "Your knowledge should not be wasted." Livia took a deep breath. "I need time to consider." "Of course." Marcus produced a stylus. "If you decide to accept, add any terms you wish to these tablets. I'll meet you here in 3 days' time for your answer." As they rose to part ways, Livia clutched the wax tablets like a shield. This arrangement, it would truly be as written? No hidden expectations. Marcus looked at her steadily. "I swear it on my honor as a Roman and a soldier. My house needs a mistress, Livia Aurelia. And perhaps—" he hesitated, "perhaps your heart needs a home." The unexpected gentleness in those last words stayed with Livia long after they parted, echoing in her mind as she walked back to her cramped room in the Subura. The tablets tucked safely in her worn cloth bag. 3 days of sleepless consideration led Livia to her decision. She had added only 2 conditions to Marcus's tablets. She would continue to visit Gaius's grave weekly, and she would be permitted to leave the arrangement with 3 months' allowance should it prove unsatisfactory to either party. When she returned to the fountain, Marcus accepted her terms without hesitation. Saying goodbye to the Subura was easier than Livia had anticipated. She had few possessions worth taking: some clothing, her healing herbs and implements, a small wooden box containing Gaius's military insignia and their marriage contract. The hardest farewell was to Cassia, who had been her only friend during the darkest days after Gaius's death. "You're doing the right thing, child," the elderly woman assured her, patting Livia's hand with gnarled fingers. "This is the God's giving you another chance." "It's not what you think," Livia explained for the third time. "It's an arrangement, not a romantic connection." Cassia's knowing smile said she believed otherwise. "So you say now, but life has a way of changing our plans. Promise you'll visit this old woman when you can." "I promise," Livia whispered, embracing Cassia gently before gathering her meager belongings. Marcus had sent his steward Titus with a litter to convey her to the villa, an unexpected courtesy that immediately set tongues wagging as it passed through the narrow streets of the Suburra. By sundown, Livia knew rumors would be racing through every corner of Rome. The villa's grandeur overwhelmed Livia despite her mental preparation. Marble columns soared toward painted ceilings, mosaic floors depicted elaborate hunting scenes, and statuary from Greece and Egypt occupied niches along the corridors. It was more opulent than any home she had ever entered, even before her family's downfall. Titus led her through the atrium and peristyle garden to the east wing. "These will be your quarters, Domina," he said, using the honorific for the mistress of the house without hesitation. Centurion Severus thought you might appreciate the morning light and proximity to the herb garden. The suite of rooms took Livia's breath away, a sitting room with couches and bookshelves, a bedroom with a real bed rather than a pallet, a private bathing chamber, and a small workspace with shelves for her healing supplies. Through tall windows, she could see an enclosed garden with established herbs and space for new plantings. "This is too much," she murmured. "The Centurion was most specific about your accommodations," Titus replied neutrally, though Livia detected a note of approval in his voice. "The household staff has been informed of your position and authority. They await your instructions regarding daily operations." Before Livia could respond to this daunting prospect, a young serving girl entered with a bundle of clothing. "The master had these prepared for you, Domina," she explained, laying out several stolas of fine wool and linen, each dyed in subtle earth tones rather than the bright colors favored by wealthy matrons seeking attention. Practical, dignified clothing. Not ornamental, not ostentatious. Marcus had understood what would make her comfortable without her having to explain. By evening, word of the arrangement had spread beyond the household. A messenger arrived with a sealed tablet, which Titus delivered to Livia with a grimace. "From Senator Claudius's wife," he explained. "An invitation to their daughter's birthday celebration next week." Livia broke the seal and read the brief message, immediately understanding its significance. The invitation had been addressed to Marcus alone, with no mention of her, despite the formal announcement of her position that had been sent to his associates earlier that day. "The first salvo," she murmured, setting the tablet aside. "Indeed, Domina," Titus agreed. "Rome's noble wives are formidable opponents." When Marcus returned from his military duties that evening, Livia met him in the atrium, still feeling like an imposter in the grand space. "I see the rumors have already begun their circuit," he said, indicating the invitation. "It didn't take long." "I expected nothing less," Livia replied. "Will you attend?" Marcus considered briefly. "We will attend if you feel prepared. Better to face the whispers directly than to hide and let them fester." "Are you certain? It might be easier for your position if you distance yourself from the woman I've installed as mistress of my house?" Marcus finished, a rare smile softening his features. "That would defeat the purpose of our arrangement, wouldn't it? Besides, I've never been one to retreat from a challenge." The next morning brought 3 more invitations, each pointedly addressed to Marcus alone. By afternoon, 2 arrived with formal inclusion of the Centurion's household companion, a deliberately ambiguous phrase that could indicate either a respected household manager or a kept woman. The most telling response came in the form of a torn invitation returned by messenger. A garden party hosted by a prominent patrician family that had initially included Marcus on their guest list. The message was clear. Some doors would now be closed to him. "Does it bother you?" Livia asked when he showed her the torn parchment. The social consequences? Marcus tossed the fragments into the brazier, watching them curl and blacken. The people I truly respect will judge us by our actions, not by gossip. The rest, he shrugged. Their good opinion was never my concern. That evening at dinner, their first shared meal in the triclinium, Marcus raised his wine cup. To new beginnings, he said simply. Livia raised her own cup, acutely aware of the distance they maintained even as their lives became entwined in the eyes of Rome. To new beginnings, she echoed, wondering what tomorrow's whispers would bring. Over the following weeks, the villa began to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. Livia approached her role with the same quiet determination that had kept her alive after Gaius's death, beginning each day before dawn to learn every aspect of the household she now managed. The first changes came to the kitchens, where Livia discovered stores of expensive spices gathering dust. Rather than the elaborate, heavy dishes favored at aristocratic tables, she instructed the cooks in preparing simpler, healthier meals that Marcus seemed to prefer. The Centurion, accustomed to military rations, expressed appreciation for food that nourished without excess. Next came the gardens. With Marcus's permission, Livia expanded the herb section to include medicinal plants, feverfew for headaches, valerian for sleep, mint for digestion, and dozens more organized in neat beds. Each morning, she worked alongside the gardeners, her hands in the soil, instructing them on proper cultivation while learning from their experience with Rome's particular climate. The most significant transformation, however, was the introduction of her recipe scrolls. Carefully preserved knowledge passed from her healing mentor and augmented by her own observations. Livia converted a small room near the kitchen into an apothecary, hanging bundles of drying herbs from the ceiling beams and arranging her remedies on shelves. "You've been busy," Marcus observed one evening, finding her there grinding dried calendula flowers into a salve. The room smelled of herbs and beeswax, a pleasant change from the usual scents of the villa. "One of the kitchen slaves burned his hand on the cooking fire," Livia explained, not looking up from her work. "This will help it heal without festering." Marcus watched her methodical movements, the practiced precision reminding him of skilled armorers in the legion. "Your knowledge is impressive. My father arranged for me to study with a Greek physician before." Livia paused, rarely speaking of her family's downfall. "Before circumstances changed." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken. Many Romans had seen fortunes reversed through political missteps or business failures. "The household benefits from your training. Titus tells me you treated his joint pain more effectively than the expensive physician he's consulted for years." Livia allowed herself a small smile. Willow bark and meadowsweet. Simple remedies, but effective. That night at dinner, now a regular shared ritual rather than Marcus eating alone in his chambers, the Centurion seemed preoccupied, studying Livia when he thought she wouldn't notice. "Have I done something wrong?" she finally asked, setting down her cup. "Quite the opposite," Marcus replied. "I was just reflecting on how quickly you've brought this house to life. The staff speaks highly of you. Even Titus, who has served my family since before I was born, says the villa hasn't felt like this since my mother was alive." Livia felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected praise. "I'm simply doing what needs to be done. With grace and wisdom," Marcus added. "I've noticed the changes, Livia. The fresh flowers in the atrium, the reorganized library scrolls, the fact that meals now happen at regular times. Small things, perhaps, but they matter." The sincerity in his voice created an unfamiliar warmth in Livia's chest. For 3 years, she had received little but pity or disdain. Genuine appreciation was a forgotten sensation. As weeks passed, Livia's confidence in her position grew. She developed a schedule for the household slaves that provided more rest than was typical in Roman homes, finding that well-rested workers performed better. She introduced weekly meetings with the household staff, addressing concerns before they became problems. And gradually, the villa's atmosphere transformed from austere efficiency to comfortable warmth. The most visible change came when Livia began receiving local women seeking healing remedies. At first, they were servants from neighboring villas, then shopkeepers' wives, and eventually even a few aristocratic women who came discreetly, preferring Livia's gentle treatments to the harsh methods of male physicians. Marcus raised no objection to this development. In fact, he arranged for a small receiving room near the villa's side entrance to be designated for Livia's healing work, providing privacy for her visitors and maintaining the household's primary functions. One evening, returning from military duties, Marcus found Livia in the peristyle garden, gathering chamomile flowers in the fading light. The scene struck him powerfully, her figure silhouetted against the sunset, moving with quiet purpose among the plants she had nurtured. For the first time in years, he returned not to an empty house but to a home. "You're late," Livia observed without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. "Dinner has been kept warm." "Thank you," Marcus replied, realizing how quickly he had grown accustomed to her thoughtfulness. "The Emperor's advisors are fond of lengthy meetings. There's bath water ready as well," she added, standing with her basket of flowers. "You look tired." Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement of the comfortable rhythm they had established, the unexpected ease of their arrangement. Then Livia looked away, maintaining the careful boundary they had both respected. "Will you join me for dinner?" Marcus asked, as he did every evening now. "Of course," Livia replied with a small smile. "I've much to tell you about the household accounts." As they walked together toward the triclinium, Marcus realized that the hollow feeling that had plagued him since returning to Rome had finally begun to subside. His house had found its beating heart. The scream tore through the night silence, jolting Livia from sleep. She sat upright, heart pounding, momentarily disoriented in her still unfamiliar bedroom. When the sound came again, raw and anguished, she realized it was coming from Marcus's chambers across the peristyle garden. Without hesitation, she lit an oil lamp and moved swiftly through the moonlit villa, her bare feet silent on the cool marble floors. Outside Marcus's door stood two household slaves, wide-eyed with uncertainty. "It's happened before," whispered the younger one, "but never this badly. Return to your quarters," Livia instructed gently. "I'll tend to him." After a moment's hesitation, they obeyed, leaving Livia alone before the heavy wooden door. From within came sounds of distress. Ragged breathing, incoherent words, the crash of something falling. "Marcus?" she called, knocking firmly. When no response came, she pushed the door open and entered. The chamber was in disarray. A small table had been overturned, a wine cup spilled across the mosaic floor. Marcus was tangled in his bedsheets, sweat-soaked and thrashing, still gripped by whatever nightmare held him. "No. Flank breaking. Hold the line," he muttered, his voice commanding even in sleep. Then, more desperately, "The ravine. Ambush. Get them out." Livia approached cautiously, setting her lamp on a nearby shelf. "Marcus," she called louder this time. "Wake up. You're dreaming." His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. In one fluid motion, he reached for the dagger kept beside his bed and lunged forward. Livia stood perfectly still as the blade stopped a hair's breadth from her throat. "It's Livia," she said calmly, though her heart raced. "You're in Rome, in your villa. You're safe." Recognition gradually returned to his eyes. Horror replaced confusion as Marcus realized what he'd nearly done. He lowered the dagger with a shaking hand. "Livia," he whispered hoarsely. "I could have. But you didn't," she interrupted, gently taking the weapon and placing it out of reach. "You stopped yourself." Marcus sat heavily on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. "I apologize for disturbing the household." "There's no need for apology," Livia replied, moving to pour water from a pitcher into a clean cup. As she did, she noted the frequency of these episodes from the resigned reaction of the slaves. "Here, drink this." He accepted the water, avoiding her gaze. The proud centurion seemed diminished somehow, vulnerable in a way she hadn't witnessed before. "Wait here," she instructed, leaving briefly for her apothecary. She returned with a small vial of amber liquid. A few drops of this in wine will help you sleep without dreams. Marcus eyed the vial suspiciously. What is it? Valerian root, passion flower, and a touch of poppy. Not enough to cause dependence, she assured him, adding a few drops to a fresh cup of watered wine. I've used it for others with battle memories. He drank it without further question, the trust implicit in the action not lost on Livia. Do they come often? She asked quietly, settling on a chair near the bed. The nightmares. Marcus stared into the empty cup. Since Dacia. Not every night, but often enough. He set the cup aside. You should return to your chambers. This isn't proper. Propriety matters little at this hour, Livia replied. And I'm here as your healer now, not as your. She trailed off, their arrangement still lacking a comfortable definition. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My house mistress. Yes, that. She studied him in the lamplight, noting the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. What was it tonight? The dream. Marcus was silent for so long that Livia thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low and controlled. A ravine in the Carpathian foothills. My scout reported it clear. I sent 3 contubernarium through. He paused, the memory visibly painful. It wasn't clear. 24 men. The Dacians had the high ground. You couldn't have known, Livia said softly. A centurion is responsible for his men. Their lives depend on his decisions. Marcus's fist clenched on his knee. 8 survived. 1 died of his wounds later. The potion was beginning to work. His rigid posture gradually relaxed. Livia waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. The worst dreams, Marcus continued, his voice growing distant, are of the faces, not just our dead, but there's a Dacian boy, no more than 16, who charged my line with nothing but a farming sickle. The village elders who chose fire over capture. He looked up at Livia, his eyes haunted. They never tell you in the triumph processions about the faces that follow you home. Livia felt a tightness in her throat. Gaius wrote to me about the nightmares. How the men would wake screaming. How some couldn't bear it and walked into their swords. The mention of her husband's name hung between them. Marcus's expression shifted to one of deep regret. He wrote of you often, he said quietly. When the men shared stories of home, he spoke of his wife with the healing hands. He carried your image with him. Tears pricked at Livia's eyes. You knew him. Not well enough to recall immediately when you first mentioned his name, Marcus admitted. But yes, I knew of him. He was respected among his brothers in arms. The potion was taking stronger hold now. Marcus's eyelids grew heavy. Livia rose to leave, but his voice stopped her. I have them too, he murmured, nearly asleep. Nightmares of the day the messenger came, of being alone. The simple confession of shared pain created a new understanding between them. Livia found herself reaching out to lightly touch his shoulder, the first time she had initiated contact since coming to the villa. You're not alone now, she said softly. Sleep. I'll stay until the dreams pass. True to her word, Livia remained in the chair until Marcus's breathing deepened into peaceful sleep. The potion had worked its simple magic, granting him temporary respite from memories too heavy to bear alone. In the quiet hours before dawn, watching over this man who carried such weight of responsibility, Livia acknowledged to herself that something had shifted. What had begun as an arrangement of mutual convenience was becoming something neither had anticipated. A true partnership built on shared understanding of loss and survival. The morning after the nightmare, neither Marcus nor Livia mentioned what had transpired. They returned to their established routines. He to his military duties, she to household management. Yet something had undeniably changed between them. A barrier had fallen, revealing the shared landscape of their separate griefs. A week later, Livia approached Marcus as he reviewed correspondence in the tablinum. She carried a roughly sketched plan on a wax tablet, hesitating at the threshold until he noticed her presence. May I speak with you about a proposal? She asked. Marcus set aside the military dispatch he'd been reading. Of course. The south-facing courtyard gets excellent light throughout the day, but it's currently unused, Livia began, setting her tablet before him. With your permission, I'd like to establish a proper healing garden there, more extensive than the herb beds we've already planted. Marcus studied her careful drawings, neatly arranged plots, a small water feature, benches placed strategically in shade. You've given this considerable thought. The villa receives many visitors now seeking remedies, Livia explained. I've depleted my stores faster than anticipated. Growing our own plants would ensure quality and reduce expense. Marcus noted her use of our, a subtle shift in how she viewed her place in the household. What resources would you need? Some labor to prepare the soil, materials for raised beds, perhaps a few specialty seeds from the eastern provinces. Livia had clearly calculated costs in advance, presenting a modest request. Consider it approved, Marcus said, then added, but I think we can do better than this. He called for Titus, instructing him to summon the villa's architect. Over the following days, what had begun as Livia's simple request transformed into a more ambitious project. The architect's plans expanded to include a covered walkway for harvesting during inclement weather, a small outbuilding for drying and processing herbs, and an irrigation system connected to the villa's water supply. This is far more than I envisioned, Livia protested when she saw the final plans. The expense is well within reason, Marcus finished, his tone brooking no argument. If we're to do this, let's do it properly. Besides, he added with unusual lightness, what better use for Dacian gold than healing? The irony wasn't lost on Livia. Wealth gained through warfare now funding a garden of peace and recovery. Construction began immediately. Each morning, Livia visited the site, conferring with workers and adjusting plans as needed. To her surprise, Marcus often joined her during these inspections, taking genuine interest in the progress and offering practical suggestions from his engineering experience with the legions. On one such morning, they found themselves alone in the partially completed garden, discussing the placement of a stone bench. It should face east, Marcus suggested, for the morning sun. But the western view overlooks the valley, Livia countered. Better for evening reflection. Their disagreement was friendly, lacking the caution that had marked their earlier interactions. As they debated, Marcus impulsively knelt to demonstrate how a particular medicinal flower should be planted, drawing from knowledge gained during campaigns in foreign territories. The Germanic tribes cultivate it differently, he explained, his hands working the soil. They plant it deeper to protect against frost. Livia knelt beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. Show me. As he demonstrated the technique, their hands briefly met in the dark soil. A simple contact that sent an unexpected warmth through both of them. For a moment, neither moved away. Then Livia gently withdrew her hand, the moment passing like a cloud shadow across the garden. You surprise me, Centurion, she said, her voice deliberately light. I wouldn't have expected a military man to know gardening techniques. 5 years in foreign lands teaches you to observe, Marcus replied. Survival often depended on knowing which plants nourished and which killed. He paused, adding quietly, not all knowledge gained in war is about destruction. By midsummer, the garden had transformed from concept to reality. Neat beds of medicinal herbs thrived in the Italian sun. Calendula with bright orange blooms, purple lavender buzzing with bees, silvery-leaved sage, delicate chamomile, and dozens more varieties arranged according to their properties and needs. On the day the final plantings were completed, Marcus presented Livia with an unexpected gift. A carved wooden bench placed at the garden's center, positioned to catch both morning light and evening views, resolving their friendly disagreement with characteristic thoughtfulness. It's perfect, Livia said simply, running her hand along the smooth cypress wood. A proper healing garden deserves a place for the healer to rest, Marcus replied. They sat together on the bench, surveying what they had created. Not just the garden itself, but the unspoken understanding that had grown between them during its creation. The space was undeniably Livia's domain, yet Marcus had contributed ideas and labor alongside her, making it a truly shared accomplishment. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus said, You've brought more than order to this house, Livia. You've brought purpose. As have you, she responded. This garden wouldn't exist without your support. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the gentle sounds of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. For the first time since coming to the villa, Livia felt truly at home, not as a dependent or employee, but as a valued partner in creating something meaningful. Word soon spread about the healing garden at Centurion Severus's villa. Women from across Rome began arriving with ailments both minor and serious, drawn by reports of the war widow whose gentle remedies worked where expensive physicians had failed. Even a senator's wife came in a curtained litter, seeking relief from migraines that had plagued her for years. Marcus observed this growing stream of visitors with quiet pride, watching from a distance as Livia built a reputation based on genuine skill rather than social position. In her healing work, she had found not just occupation but vocation, her hands creating remedies from plants they had grown together in what was now, undeniably, their shared home. The invitation arrived sealed with the imperial eagle, not a request but a summons. Senator Flavius, a close advisor to the emperor, was hosting a banquet to honor military commanders who had served in the Dacian campaign. Marcus's presence was required, not optional. You'll need to attend, Livia observed as Marcus read the formal scroll at breakfast. The emperor's favor is not something to decline. We will need to attend, Marcus corrected. The invitation specifies I may bring a companion. Livia set down her cup, suddenly tense. Are you certain that's wise? This will be different from the smaller gatherings we've attended. The imperial circle, senators, military tribunes. All the more reason to have you by my side, Marcus replied with unexpected firmness. Unless you prefer not to go. 3 months into their arrangement, they had established a comfortable routine within the villa and ventured out together only to select social functions. This would be their first appearance before Rome's highest echelon of power. I have nothing suitable to wear for such an occasion, Livia said finally, her practical concern masking deeper anxiety. The next morning, Marcus departed early but returned before midday, accompanied by 2 female slaves carrying large bundles. He directed them to Livia's chambers and then discreetly withdrew. When Livia entered her rooms, she found an array of fine garments spread across her bed, stolas in silk and the finest wool, embroidered pallas in subtle colors, delicate leather sandals, and even a small wooden box containing modest but elegant jewelry. The master commissioned these specially, explained the older slave, a skilled seamstress from Greece. We're to make any necessary adjustments before the banquet. Livia ran her fingers over a stola of deep blue silk bordered with silver embroidery, more luxurious than anything she had ever worn, yet tasteful rather than ostentatious. Marcus had somehow understood exactly what would make her feel both appropriate and comfortable. The night of the banquet arrived with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Livia allowed the household slaves to arrange her hair in a simple but elegant style, adorned with a single silver pin rather than the elaborate ornaments favored by patrician women. The blue stola flowed gracefully as she moved, the color bringing out the auburn highlights in her hair. When she emerged into the atrium where Marcus waited, his reaction made the hours of preparation worthwhile. He stood perfectly still, momentarily speechless, his eyes taking in the transformation. "You look," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "Rome will not know where to look tonight, with such beauty in its midst." Livia felt a blush warm her cheeks. "The garments you chose are perfect. Thank you for your thoughtfulness." "The garments merely complement what was already there," Marcus replied simply. The journey to Senator Flavius's palatial villa on the Palatine Hill passed in comfortable silence, both mentally preparing for the scrutiny they would face. As their litter approached the entrance lined with burning torches, Marcus spoke quietly. "Remember, you have earned your place here as much as anyone. Stand tall." The grand triclinium of Senator Flavius could have held a small army. Couches arranged in the traditional U-shape surrounded low tables already laden with exotic delicacies. Servants circulated with wine, while musicians played softly in the background. The room represented the pinnacle of Roman luxury and power. Their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation. Marcus, resplendent in his formal military attire complete with decorations, commanded natural respect. But it was Livia who drew curious glances, the unknown woman at the hero's side, neither wife nor obvious concubine, carrying herself with quiet dignity. Centurion Severus. Senator Flavius approached, arms extended in greeting. The man who held the mountain pass. Welcome, welcome. His eyes flickered. Briefly to Livia, assessment barely concealed beneath politeness. And you've brought company. How delightful. Senator Flavius, may I present Livia Aurelia, mistress of my household? Marcus said, his voice carrying enough to ensure those nearby would hear the formal introduction. The senator's smile remained fixed as he inclined his head. Charmed, I'm sure. Please, enjoy the hospitality of my home. As they moved further into the room, whispers followed like ripples in a pond. Livia maintained her composure, drawing on the same inner strength that had sustained her through public humiliation after Gaius's death. That's her, the war widow he installed in his villa. I heard she was his soldier's wife before. My physician says she sells herbs to the common people. Marcus strategically guided Livia toward a group of military officers and their wives, knowing they would be more accepting than the senatorial families. His instinct proved correct. The officers treated her with respect born of understanding that war created unconventional bonds. One commander's wife, a kind-faced woman named Portia, engaged Livia in genuine conversation about her healing work. My husband swears by willow bark for his old battle injuries, she confided. Perhaps you could suggest something additional? As dinner progressed, Livia navigated the complex social currents with increasing confidence. When a senator's daughter, Valeria, whom Marcus had once been encouraged to court, made a pointed comment about women who rise above their proper station, Livia responded with such gracious dignity that the younger woman appeared petty by comparison. The evening's true test came when the emperor's representative requested musical entertainment. As guests moved to the adjoining chamber, a group of senators' wives deliberately left no space for Livia on their couches. Without hesitation, Marcus guided her to a couch occupied by military men, who immediately made room for them both. Breaking with strict protocol, he sat beside her rather than on a separate couch, the gesture a clear public alignment with her position. As the music played, their eyes met briefly in shared understanding. They were allies in this battlefield of status and propriety, just as surely as Marcus had been allied with his men in Dacia. Later, as their litter carried them home through torchlit streets, a tension Livia hadn't realized she was carrying finally released. We survived, she said with a small laugh. More than survived, Marcus replied. You were magnificent. Did you see Valeria's face when you spoke so knowledgeably about Greek medicine? Or Senator Rufus when you mentioned your father had translated Hippocrates? I may have enjoyed that more than was entirely proper, Livia admitted. Marcus smiled in the darkness. As did I. As they approached the villa, their home, something had shifted yet again in their carefully balanced relationship. They had faced Rome's judgment together and emerged stronger for it, neither backing down nor compromising their unique arrangement. That night, as Livia removed the beautiful stola and carefully laid it away, she caught her reflection in the polished metal mirror. The woman who looked back at her was neither the senator's daughter she had once been nor the destitute widow she had become. She was someone new, someone growing into unexpected strength and purpose beside a man who saw her value when others saw only her circumstances. Autumn brought cooler days and earlier sunsets to Rome. 6 months had passed since Livia first entered Marcus's villa, a period that had transformed both the household and its inhabitants. What had begun as an arrangement of convenience had evolved into a partnership of mutual respect and deepening affection, though neither had acknowledged the subtle shift in their feelings. On a crisp October evening, Marcus hosted a small dinner for his fellow officers, a gathering of men who had served together in Dacia, now assigned to various duties throughout Rome. These were comfortable affairs, lacking the rigid formality of senatorial banquets, where military men could speak freely among trusted comrades. Livia had grown accustomed to these gatherings, supervising the meal preparations before discreetly withdrawing to her chambers. Tonight, however, Marcus had specifically requested her presence at the dinner, a first that indicated yet another evolution in their relationship. "These men respect you," he explained when she questioned the change. "And I value your insights. Stay if you're willing." She agreed, taking care with her appearance. A stola of deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair, now worn looser than Roman fashion dictated but in a style Marcus had once mentioned he found pleasing. The guests arrived as the sun set, 4 officers who had served directly under Marcus, men who had seen him at his best and worst on the battlefield. Among them was a newcomer, a barrel-chested centurion named Cassius Veteranus who had commanded an adjacent century during the campaign. His booming laugh filled the atrium as servants took his cloak. "Marcus Antonius Severus," he bellowed, embracing his host with back-slapping enthusiasm. "Still as serious as a Vestal Virgin, I see." Marcus returned the embrace with genuine warmth. "And you're still loud enough to alert every Dacian scout within 5 miles. Welcome, old friend." The dinner began pleasantly enough, with the traditional first course of eggs and olives accompanied by honeyed wine. Livia sat at Marcus's right, slightly apart as befitted her unique position, observing the easy camaraderie of men who had faced death together. "Remember that Sarmatian scout who led us through the mountain pass?" one officer reminisced. "I was certain he was leading us into a trap." "Marcus trusted him," another replied. "And Marcus was right, as usual." Cassius, already on his 3rd cup of wine, leaned forward. "Not always right, though, eh? Remember that ravine ambush? Lost, 20 men there." A momentary tension fell over the table. Marcus's face remained composed, but Livia, attuned to his expressions after months of close observation, noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the same look he wore when nightmares disturbed his sleep. 18 dead, 9 wounded, Marcus corrected quietly. "I remember each one." Conversation shifted to lighter topics as the main courses arrived: roasted fowl, fish in garum sauce, and vegetable dishes Livia had designed to be both healthful and appealing to military appetites. Throughout the meal, she noticed Cassius studying her with increasing intensity, his gaze becoming less guarded as wine loosened his restraint. Finally, as servants cleared away plates for the fruit and nut course, Cassius slammed his cup down with sudden recognition. "By Jupiter's cock, I know who you are," he exclaimed, pointing at Livia. "You're Aurelius's widow. From the 10th century." The room fell silent. Livia froze, the name of her husband hanging in the air like a drawn blade. "Cassius," Marcus warned, "you've had enough wine." But the burly centurion was too far into his cups to heed the warning. No, I'm certain. Gaius Aurelius Nepos, tall fellow, good with a javelin. Had a wife he wouldn't shut up about. A healer, he said, his bleary eyes focused on Livia. "That's you, isn't it?" Livia's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Yes, Gaius was my husband." Cassius let out a bark of laughter, oblivious to the tension around him. What a strange world. The widow of the man who saved our commander's life, now warming his bed. The gods have a sense of humor. The blood drained from Livia's face. She turned to Marcus, whose expression had gone completely rigid. "What does he mean?" Sensing the sudden shift, the other officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One rose discreetly, gesturing for the others to follow. "Perhaps we should continue this another time." "No," Livia said firmly, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "I want to hear what Centurion Cassius means." Cassius, finally registering the gravity of the situation, attempted to backtrack. "Just a soldier's talk. Pay no mind." "Tell me," Livia insisted. Marcus spoke at last, his voice low and controlled. "Leave us, all of you. Except Cassius, you stay." Once the room had cleared, Marcus reached for a small chest kept near his dining couch. From it, he withdrew a military medal, a simple bronze disc on a leather cord. The artifact seemed to weigh heavily in his hand as he placed it before Livia. "This should have been given to you 3 years ago," he said, each word measured. "It's the Medal of Valor, awarded posthumously to your husband." Livia stared at the medal, then back at Marcus. Why are you only showing me this now? Because, Marcus said, meeting her eyes directly, I was the one who should have died that day, not Gaius. Cassius, sobering quickly in the face of the unfolding drama, shifted uncomfortably. I should not have spoken. No, you shouldn't have, Marcus agreed sharply. But what's done is done. With deliberate calm, he began the story Livia should have heard years earlier. It was during the final push toward Sarmizegetusa. We were ambushed in a narrow pass. I took an arrow in the shoulder, went down. The Dacians were closing in. His voice remained steady, but pain etched every word. Gaius broke formation to reach me. He dragged me behind cover, stood over me while firing his last javelins. He killed 3 before they— Marcus paused. Before they reached him. Livia's hands trembled as she touched the metal. You knew. All this time you knew who I was, who my husband was. Yes. The simple admission shattered months of carefully built trust. Livia rose from her couch, fury and betrayal replacing shock. Was that why you approached me at the cemetery? Why you offered me this position? Guilt? Penance? Each question lashed like a whip. Was I just your way of atoning for surviving when he didn't? Marcus stood as well, his composure finally breaking. It began that way, he admitted. But it became something else. Something real. Real. Livia's laugh held no humor. What part was real, Marcus? The part where you watched me mourn a husband you knew died saving you? The part where you made me grateful for your generosity while hiding the truth? Livia, please. Did you ever intend to tell me? She demanded. The painful silence that followed was answer enough. Livia reached for the medal, closing her fingers around the cold metal that represented her husband's final sacrifice. I'll be gone by morning, she said, her voice suddenly calm and distant. I thank you for your hospitality. These past months, Centurion Severus. As she walked from the room, back straight and head high despite the tears threatening to fall, Cassius let out a low whistle. You've made a proper mess of things, haven't you, Marcus? Marcus didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the doorway through which Livia had vanished, taking with her the fragile happiness he had come to cherish more than he had ever dared admit. Dawn found Marcus alone in the villa's atrium, sleepless and haunted by the consequences of his deception. As he had feared, Livia had indeed departed, slipping away before first light with only a small bundle of possessions, leaving behind all the finery he had provided during their months together. Only the medal was missing, along with her personal healing implements and the worn wedding bracelet she had never removed. Titus approached cautiously, his elderly face lined with concern. The household awaits your instructions, Domini. Find her, Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from a night of silent anguish. Send servants to her old lodgings in the Subura, to the markets where she gathered herbs, to anywhere she might have sought shelter. The steward hesitated. And if we locate her? Do not approach her, Marcus instructed. Simply inform me of her whereabouts. The choice to return must be hers alone. As servants dispersed throughout the city, Marcus retreated to his study, unrolling a map of Rome on his desk. With methodical precision born of military training, he began marking potential locations. The cemetery where Gaius was buried, the temples where a woman alone might find sanctuary, the homes of patients she had treated who might offer temporary refuge. By midday, the first reports returned, all negative. Livia's former room in the Subura had new occupants who knew nothing of her whereabouts. The cemetery caretaker had not seen her. The herb sellers in the market claimed ignorance, though Marcus suspected some might be deliberately withholding information out of loyalty to Livia. She couldn't have simply vanished, he muttered, marking another failed location on his increasingly annotated map. As afternoon faded toward evening, Marcus abandoned the strategy of sending servants. Some inquiries required a personal touch, and perhaps it was fitting that he should humble himself in the search. Changing into the plain clothing he sometimes wore for anonymous walks through the city, he set out alone toward the Subura district. The Rome that Marcus encountered on foot was vastly different from the one he normally inhabited. In the warren of narrow streets that made up the city's poorest quarter, Garbage rotted in corners, wastewater ran in open gutters, and hollow-eyed children watched him warily from shadowed doorways. This was Livia's Rome, the harsh reality she had navigated alone for 3 years after Gaius's death. A gnarled old woman washing linens in a communal fountain narrowed her eyes as Marcus approached. "Looking for someone, fine sir? You seem lost." Something in her knowing tone suggested she might have information. "I seek a healer, Livia Aurelia. She once lived in this district. And why would such as you seek such as her?" The woman challenged, wringing water from a tattered tunic with surprising strength. "I owe her a debt I can never repay," Marcus answered honestly. The old woman studied him for a long moment. "Many seek the healing woman. Not all deserve to find her." "Please," Marcus said, a word that rarely passed his lips. "I have wronged her and must make amends if I can." "Humph." The woman turned back to her washing. "I haven't seen Livia since spring. But if I were seeking a woman with healing skills who wished to disappear, I'd look to the temples, particularly those outside the city walls, where questions are fewer." It was the first useful lead of the day. "Which temple?" "I've said enough." The woman flicked water from her fingers in dismissal. "If the gods favor your search, you'll find her. If not," she shrugged expressively. As Marcus turned to leave, the woman called after him. "She was kind to me when my grandson had the fever. Brought medicines though I had no coin to pay. Remember that when you find her. She deserves kindness in return." Night was falling as Marcus exited the city through the southern gate. His map now marked with the locations of healing temples within a day's journey of Rome. The closest was a sanctuary of Asclepius situated on a small hill overlooking the Tiber, known for accepting women with medical knowledge as attendants. The temple complex was peaceful in the gathering dusk, oil lamps casting golden light from windows as attendants prepared for evening rituals. Marcus approached the entrance, where a robed priestess stood watch. "I seek a woman who may have come here seeking sanctuary," he began. "Livia Aurelia, a skilled healer. We do not divulge the names of those who serve within these walls," the priestess interrupted firmly. "If you require healing, return tomorrow when the temple is open to supplicants." Marcus recognized the protective strategy, neither confirming nor denying Livia's presence. "Please," he said, the word becoming easier with repetition. "I do not wish to disturb her. I only need to know she is safe." The priestess's expression softened slightly. "All who seek the god's protection here are safe. That is all I can tell you." It was confirmation enough. Relief flooded through Marcus. Livia had found sanctuary in a place where her skills would be valued and her person respected. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a sealed letter he had prepared before leaving the villa. "Will you give her this? She need not respond. She need not see me. I ask only that my words reach her." After a moment's consideration, the priestess accepted the scroll. "I will ensure it reaches the person for whom it is intended, if such a person exists here." "Thank you." Marcus bowed his head in genuine gratitude. As he turned to begin the journey back to Rome, the priestess called after him, "Centurion." He paused, surprised she had recognized his identity despite his plain clothing. "Sometimes wounds of the heart take longer to heal than wounds of the body," she said. "The god teaches patience above all." Walking back along the moonlit road, Marcus felt both hope and despair in equal measure. He had found Livia, or at least her likely location, but the distance between them now measured more than physical steps. It was a chasm of broken trust that only time and truth might bridge, if at all. Upon returning to the villa, he found it eerily silent, the absence of Livia's presence more palpable than ever. The healing garden they had created together stood empty under the stars, herbs swaying gently in the night breeze, awaiting hands that might not return to tend them. Days passed with no word from the temple. Marcus maintained his daily duties with mechanical precision while the villa gradually reverted to its former state, ordered but lifeless. The garden Livia had cultivated began to show signs of neglect until Marcus instructed the gardeners to maintain it exactly as she had established. Each evening, He would sit on the cypress bench they had shared, a tangible reminder of what had been lost through his deception. On the 7th day, unable to bear the waiting any longer, Marcus returned to the temple of Asclepius. This time he brought no letter, only himself, and the full truth he should have offered from the beginning. The same priestess met him at the entrance, her expression revealing nothing. "You return, Centurion. I must know if she read my words," Marcus said simply. "Come," the priestess replied, leading him not into the temple proper but to a small garden on its eastern side. "Wait here." Left alone among carefully tended medicinal plants, so similar to those Livia had cultivated at the villa, Marcus felt a painful surge of hope. The priestess would not have brought him here unless she received your letter. A voice spoke from behind him, not Livia, but an elderly priestess with eyes that held the wisdom of decades. "I am Emilia, high priestess of this sanctuary." Marcus bowed respectfully. "Did she read it?" "She did." The high priestess settled on a stone bench, gesturing for Marcus to join her. Though perhaps not with the reaction you hoped for. The confirmation that Livia was indeed here sent a complex wave of emotion through Marcus. Relief mingled with anxiety. "May I see her?" "That is not for me to decide," Emilia replied. "But I will tell you this. The woman who arrived at our gates 5 days ago was broken in spirit, though she tried valiantly to hide it. She works from dawn until night, tending the sick, preparing remedies, sleeping only when exhaustion overcomes her." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, pained by the image. "I never meant to cause her such suffering." "Yet you did," Emilia observed without judgment. "Through actions begun in guilt and maintained through fear." Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. "Yes, your letter spoke of regret, of explanation. But words on parchment lack the power of words spoken face to face." The high priestess studied him with penetrating clarity. "What would you say to her if she stood before you now?" Marcus considered carefully, understanding this was no mere hypothetical question. "I would tell her the full truth, not just about her husband's death, but about my cowardice in hiding it. I would tell her that what began as atonement became something I never expected." "And what was that?" "Healing," Marcus replied softly. "Not just for my home or my nightmares, but for my soul." She brought life back into a place that had been merely existing. The high priestess nodded slowly. "Write it down." "I've already sent a letter." "Not a letter," Emilia corrected. "A confession, complete and without reservation. Every truth you have withheld, every feeling you have disguised, every fear that kept you silent. Write it as though it were your final testament." Understanding dawned. "And you will give it to her." "I will place it in her hands myself," the high priestess confirmed. "What she does with it then will be her choice alone." That night, Marcus sat at his writing desk until dawn, pouring out the confession that should have been spoken months earlier. He wrote of the battle where Gaius had fallen, describing in unflinching detail how her husband had saved not just Marcus but 3 other men through his sacrifice. He wrote of returning to Rome with the weight of survivor's guilt, of seeing Livia at the cemetery and recognizing her from Gaius's descriptions. He confessed how his initial approach had indeed been motivated by guilt and a desire for atonement. But with painful honesty, he also revealed how quickly those motivations had been transformed by Livia herself. Her strength, her dignity, her healing spirit that had changed not just his household but his heart. Most difficult of all, he explained his fear that revealing the truth would destroy whatever fragile connection was forming between them, fear that she would see him forever as the man her husband died to save rather than as himself. "I was a coward on the one battlefield where courage truly mattered," he wrote in conclusion. "I have led men against impossible odds without hesitation, yet I could not find the courage to offer you the truth you deserved. For that failing, I can ask no forgiveness, only that you know how deeply I regret the pain my silence has caused you. What began as my attempt to make amends became the greatest gift I have ever received. You brought warmth to cold rooms, purpose to empty days, and healing to wounds I thought would never close. Whether you return or not, Know that you have forever changed my understanding of what it means to truly live, not merely survive. Asterisk. Asterisk, the choice now is yours, as it always should have been. The villa remains your home if you wish it, whether I am welcome there or not. The garden awaits your touch, as do the people who have come to depend on your healing skills. Asterisk. Asterisk, I ask nothing, expect nothing, deserve nothing. I offer only truth, long overdue. Asterisk. At the bottom, he signed his name simply, Marcus. The following morning, he returned to the temple, the scroll sealed with his personal mark. The high priestess received it without comment, her ancient eyes seeming to measure not just the parchment but the man who delivered it. Now we wait, she said, her tone suggesting that patience was itself a form of healing. Return to your duties, Centurion. If there is to be an answer, it will come in its own time. As Marcus departed the peaceful sanctuary, he felt oddly lightened, though uncertainty still clouded his future. For the first time since Livia had walked away, he had done what honor demanded, offered complete truth without expectation or condition. Whatever came next would be her choice, freely made with full knowledge. It was, he reflected, the only gift worthy of her. A fortnight passed with no word from Livia. Marcus maintained his duties with outward composure while the household continued its routines under Titus's capable management. Yet everyone felt the absence at the heart of the villa. The warmth that had briefly transformed it from a house into a home had disappeared with Livia's departure. On a rain-soaked morning, Marcus stood beneath the colonnade overlooking the healing garden. Despite the gardener's efforts, it had lost something essential, the loving attention that had made it thrive rather than merely survive. Like the villa itself, it existed without truly living. Centurion Severus? Marcus turned to find a temple acolyte standing at the garden entrance, rain dripping from her woolen cloak. Yes, High Priestess Emilia sent me. The young woman extended a small scroll sealed with the temple's mark. She said this requires your immediate attention. Heart racing, Marcus broke the seal, hoping for word from Livia. Instead, he found a brief note in the High Priestess's elegant hand. Asterisk, she has read your words. She has requested time to consider them in solitude. I counsel patience, though I know it comes difficultly to men of action. The gods work in their own time, not ours. Asterisk. Disappointment washed through him, though he maintained his composure before the messenger. Thank you for bringing this. Please convey my gratitude to the High Priestess. There is more, the acolyte added. The priestess said to tell you that the healer works now in the soldiers' ward. Many wounded have arrived from the northern frontier. This unexpected information jolted Marcus from his personal concerns. Wounded? From Dacia? Yes, Centurion. Apparently, there has been a new uprising in the conquered territories. The temple received many injured men yesterday. Before Marcus could question her further, a military messenger arrived at the villa gates, moving with the urgent purpose that Marcus recognized immediately as bearing critical news. The man saluted sharply. Centurion Severus, your presence is required immediately at the Praetorian barracks. Orders from the emperor himself. Within the hour, Marcus stood before a council of Rome's highest military commanders, the emperor's chief advisor presiding. Maps of the Dacian territories were spread across a large table, markers indicating troop positions and reported enemy movements. The situation is grave, the military governor explained. Dacian rebels have united with Sarmatian tribes to the east. They've overrun 3 outposts and threatened the mining operations that are vital to Rome's treasury. How did this happen? Another commander demanded. We crushed their resistance thoroughly. Apparently not thoroughly enough, came the grim reply. Intelligence suggests they've been planning this uprising for months, waiting until our forces were reduced and redeployed to other frontiers. The emperor's advisor turned to Marcus. Centurion Severus, you know the territory better than any commander we have available. You understand how these tribes think, how they fight. Marcus studied the map, professional focus temporarily displacing personal turmoil. They'll use the mountain passes to control movement just as before. Their strength is in ambush tactics and knowledge of the terrain. Precisely why you're being recalled to active field command, the advisor stated. We're assembling a response force immediately. You'll depart with the dawn tide. The orders were both expected and jarring. After months of administrative duties in Rome, Marcus was being sent back to the very battlefields that haunted his dreams. Back to Dacia, where Gaius had died saving him, where so many men under his command had fallen. How long is the deployment expected to last? He asked, already calculating what arrangements would be needed for the villa in his absence. Indefinite, came the blunt reply. Until the rebellion is crushed. Could be months. Could be longer. As the meeting concluded with detailed operational planning, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once again. Men would live or die based on his decisions, just as before. Yet something was different now. The man returning to war was not the same one who had left it. Upon returning to the villa, Marcus summoned Titus to his study. I've been recalled to Dacia, he explained, handing the steward a sealed document. These are my instructions for managing the household in my absence. The elderly steward accepted the orders with a grave nod. When do you depart, Domini? Tomorrow at dawn. Marcus hesitated before adding, there is one more matter. If Livia Aurelia should return while I'm gone, she is to be given full authority over the household as before. Everything remains hers to command as she sees fit. And if she does not return? Titus asked carefully. Then the villa stands ready for her, should she ever change her mind. Marcus turned to the window, gazing out at the garden they had created together. See that nothing changes in her absence, especially the healing garden. That evening, as Marcus prepared for departure, checking armor, selecting weapons with the methodical precision ingrained by years of military service, a different kind of preparation occupied his thoughts. He sat at his writing desk one final time, composing a letter that might be his last communication with Livia. Unlike his confession, this message was brief. Livia, I am recalled to Dacia to face a new uprising. The villa remains your home, whether I return or not. Titus has instructions to afford you every authority you previously held. I go to face the same enemy that took Gaius from you. If fate decrees I should fall where he did, perhaps there is justice in that. If I return, I will do so a better man than the one who left, one worthy of the truth he should have honored from the beginning. Whatever you decide about your future, know that you have changed mine irrevocably and for the better. Marcus. He sealed the letter and entrusted it to a temple messenger, with instructions to deliver it directly to the high priestess for Livia's eyes only. Dawn found Marcus at the Ostia docks, overseeing the loading of troops and supplies onto ships bound for the Adriatic coast. From there, they would march north into the mountains where Dacian rebels gathered, the same mountains where he had once led men to victory at terrible cost. As the morning sun broke through storm clouds, Marcus took one last look toward Rome, toward the villa where he had briefly found peace, toward the temple where Livia might at this moment be reading his final words. The ship's captain approached. The men are boarded, Centurion. We await only your command to depart. Marcus nodded, turning away from Rome to face the eastern horizon. Then let us not keep the enemy waiting. High Priestess Emilia found Livia in the soldier's ward, tending to a young legionnaire with a festering leg wound. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she cleaned and dressed the injury, her face composed despite the grim task. You have a gift, Emilia observed, waiting until Livia had finished before approaching. These men heal faster under your care. Livia wiped her hands on a clean cloth. It helps that I understand their pain, not just the physical wounds. Indeed, the older woman studied her carefully. You've received another message from Rome. Livia's expression revealed nothing, though her hands stilled momentarily. I've had enough messages. Emilia extended the sealed scroll. This one comes with news you should know, regardless of your feelings toward the sender. Something in the priestess's tone made Livia accept the letter. She broke the seal and read Marcus's brief message, her composure faltering as she absorbed its meaning. He's returning to Dacia, she said. more to herself than to Emilia. Where Gaius died. War continues its cruel cycle, the priestess observed. One generation's peace purchased with another's blood. Livia reread the letter, noting the resignation in Marcus's words, his acceptance that he might not return, his concern for her future security regardless of his fate. Despite everything, he had ensured she would have a home, whether or not she chose to claim it. That night, sleep eluded her. Images of two men haunted her thoughts. Gaius, whose face grew less distinct with each passing year, and Marcus, whose features remained vivid despite her efforts to forget. Both now facing the same deadly battlefields, separated only by time. At dawn, Livia sought out the high priestess. I need your counsel. Emilia led her to the temple gardens, where morning light cast long shadows across the medicinal plants. You've reached a decision. Not a decision. A realization. Livia gazed at the distant outline of Rome. I've been hiding here, nursing my hurt pride and sense of betrayal. Meanwhile, men suffer, both on the battlefield and in the city. And what does this realization tell you to do? I'm not certain, Livia admitted, but I know I cannot stay here, safe behind temple walls, while others face the consequences of this new conflict. The high priestess nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the greatest healing happens not in temples but in the world's painful messiness. You have learned much here, but perhaps your true calling lies elsewhere. By midday, Livia had gathered her few possessions, including the medal that had revealed Marcus's deception and his guilt. The temple had been a sanctuary when she needed it most, but now a different duty called. You will always have a place here, Emilia assured her at the gates. Thank you for showing me the path forward, Livia replied, embracing the older woman. Even when I couldn't see it myself. The journey to the Celian Hill took less than 2 hours, yet it felt like crossing a threshold between two lives. As the villa came into view, Livia paused, momentarily overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Anger still simmering beneath the surface, yet tempered now by understanding born of Marcus's complete confession. Titus greeted her at the gate, his stoic expression softening with genuine relief. Domina, you've returned. Not as before, Livia clarified. I've come because there is work to be done, not to resume previous arrangements. The steward nodded, accepting her terms without question. The centurion left instructions that you should have full authority in his absence. He presented her with Marcus's seal ring, the symbol of his legal authority, a powerful token in Roman society. Livia accepted it with appropriate gravity, understanding what this trust signified. With this ring, she could command not just the household but access Marcus's considerable resources and connections. What news from the front? She asked as they walked through the familiar atrium. Little yet, Titus replied, but reports from merchants suggest the fighting is fierce. The first wounded have already returned to the city. Livia's mind worked rapidly, assessing needs and resources. The east wing has good light and ventilation. How quickly could it be converted to accommodate injured soldiers? Titus raised an eyebrow. You intend to bring wounded men here? To a private villa? Is there a better use for these empty rooms while their owner risks his life? Livia challenged. Besides, many of the military hospitals are overcrowded and poorly managed. After a moment's consideration, Titus nodded. It could be ready within days with proper planning. That evening, Livia walked alone in the healing garden, noting with appreciation how it had been maintained in her absence. Touching the plants she had cultivated months earlier grounded her, connecting past and present in a tangible way. Within a week, the villa's transformation was underway. The east wing had been rearranged with orderly rows of beds. Supplies arrived daily: bandages, herbs, surgical tools, purchased with funds Marcus had left at Livia's disposal. Word spread among military physicians that a special recovery center was being established for difficult cases. The first patients arrived 10 days later, 6 soldiers with serious but non-fatal wounds that required extended care beyond what overcrowded military hospitals could provide. Livia worked alongside 2 assistants from the Temple of Asclepius, implementing healing techniques that combined Roman medical knowledge with remedies she had developed. As autumn deepened toward winter, more wounded arrived from the Eastern Front. With each new patient, Livia sought news of the campaign, and of Marcus specifically. Reports were fragmentary and often contradictory. The fighting had intensified in the mountain passes. The rebels were being pushed back. No, they were advancing. Centurion Severus had achieved a strategic victory. No, his century had been ambushed and suffered heavy casualties. Then, on a cold December morning, a blood-stained dispatch arrived bearing the imperial seal. Titus brought it directly to Livia, his face grave. "From the front," he said simply. "It does not bear good news." Livia broke the seal with steady hands that belied her inner turmoil. The message was brief and devastating. Centurion Marcus Antonius Severus was reported killed in action during a fierce engagement near the Dacian capital. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, with the composure that had carried her through personal tragedy before, Livia carefully refolded the dispatch. "We continue our work," she told the waiting household staff, her voice steady despite the hollow ache spreading through her chest. "These men still need our care. That is what he would expect of us." That night, alone in her chambers, Livia finally allowed herself to weep. Not just for Marcus, but for Gaius, for all the men who never returned, and for the future that had been glimpsed but never realized. Winter tightened its grip on Rome, bringing cold rains and occasional snow to the Seven Hills. Despite the official report of Marcus's death, Livia maintained the villa as a recovery center, channeling her grief into healing others. 20 beds now filled the east wing, each occupied by a wounded soldier receiving care far superior to that available in military hospitals. The work consumed her days and most of her nights, leaving little time for mourning. Perhaps that was intentional, a lesson learned from Gaius's death about the danger of dwelling too long in sorrow's shadow. This time, purpose anchored her against grief's undertow. "You should rest," Titus advised one evening, finding Livia checking bandages long after the household had retired. "You cannot heal others if you collapse yourself." "I'll rest when they no longer need me," she replied, though she recognized the wisdom in his concern. Word of the villa's exceptional care spread throughout Rome. Senior military officials visited to observe Livia's methods, impressed by recovery rates that exceeded the army's medical facilities. Families of wounded men brought offerings of gratitude, food, wine, small tokens of appreciation that Livia accepted with grace, while redirecting their generosity toward supplies for future patients. On a particularly bitter February morning, as Livia reviewed inventory lists in the atrium, a commotion at the villa gates drew her attention. Voices raised in surprise, hurried footsteps, Titus calling for assistance. Setting aside her work, she moved toward the disturbance, assuming another seriously wounded soldier had arrived. What she saw instead stopped her heart. 2 men supported a third between them, his weight divided between their shoulders as they struggled through the entrance. The central figure was gaunt and pale, his left arm bound in a crude sling, his military cloak stained and tattered beyond recognition. Yet, despite his diminished state, Livia would have known him anywhere. "Marcus." Their eyes met across the atrium. For a frozen moment, neither moved nor spoke. Then the practical healer in Livia took command over the shocked woman. "Bring him to the south chamber," she instructed the men supporting him. "Titus, have hot water and clean linens brought immediately, and send for my surgical tools." Only when these orders had been given did she approach Marcus, her professional demeanor masking the storm of emotions beneath. "You were reported dead." "An exaggeration," he replied, his voice hoarse but with a ghost of his old dry humor. Though not by much. As his supporters helped him toward the chamber Livia had indicated, she noted his difficulty walking, the careful way he held his torso suggesting broken ribs, the pallor that spoke of blood loss and fever. Whatever battle he had survived had nearly claimed him. In the privacy of the south chamber, her own medical room, not the common recovery ward, Livia dismissed the men who had brought him and began her assessment. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, clearly exhausted by the journey but watching her with an intensity that made her hands less steady than usual. They said you'd returned, he said as she cut away the filthy bandages from his arm. That you were treating wounded here. I wasn't sure I believed it until now. Hold still, she instructed, avoiding both his gaze and his implied question about her return. This wound is infected. Beneath the crude field dressings, a deep gash ran from shoulder to elbow, the edges red and swollen. Without the solid medical care Livia could provide, he might well have lost the arm or his life to blood poisoning. Adation falx, Marcus explained, wincing as she probed the wound. Their curved blades are designed to hook behind shields. I know, Livia replied softly. Gaius described them in his letters. The mention of her husband's name hung between them, but, without the accusation it might once have carried. Instead, it felt like acknowledgement of a shared history that could no longer be denied or avoided. As Livia cleaned and treated the infected wound, she conducted a thorough examination of his other injuries. 3 ribs broken and partially healed, a knife wound to the thigh that had been competently stitched by a field surgeon, extensive bruising across his back and shoulders, and the gaunt frame that spoke of weeks without adequate food. You shouldn't have traveled in this condition, she admonished, applying a poultice of yarrow and garlic to the arm wound before wrapping it in clean linen. I received your message, Marcus said, as if this explained everything. Message? I sent no message. Not directly, but word reached our camp that Centurion Severus's villa had been transformed into a healing center for wounded soldiers, that his house mistress had returned and was working miracles with the injured others had abandoned. His eyes held hers. Did you think I wouldn't recognize your hand in that? Livia turned away, busying herself with her medicines. The villa has the space and resources. It seemed wasteful not to use them. You could have sold everything and left, Marcus observed. The ring I gave Titus for you carried full legal authority. These men needed help, she replied simply. When she turned back, Marcus had managed to lie down, his exhaustion finally overwhelming even his desire to speak with her. But his eyes remained on her face, studying her as if memorizing features he had feared never seeing again. Your bloodied cloak, she said, indicating the ruined garment that had been removed. May I burn it, he suggested. Mend it, she corrected softly. As a reminder, understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement that some things, once broken, could be repaired, though they would forever bear the marks of their damage. Rest now, Livia instructed, her professional tone returning. We can talk when you're stronger. As she turned to leave, his hand caught hers, a light touch easily broken if she wished. Livia, he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. Thank you for coming home. Home. The word pierced through the careful armor she had built around her heart since reading his confession at the temple. This villa had indeed become home, not because of its luxury or security, but because within these walls she had found purpose again, perhaps even healing. Sleep, Marcus, she replied, gently disengaging her hand. I'll return to check your fever. Only when she had closed the door behind her did Livia lean against the wall, eyes closed, allowing herself to acknowledge the truth she had been fighting since receiving news of his supposed death, that losing Marcus would have left a void in her life no amount of purposeful work could have filled. Spring arrived in Rome, bringing renewal to the city and its inhabitants. In the villa's healing garden, new growth emerged from carefully tended soil, a mirror to the slow, steady recovery happening within its walls. Marcus regained his strength gradually under Livia's attentive care. As his body healed, they rebuilt their relationship with careful honesty, spending long evenings in conversation about the past they shared and the futures they had separately imagined. No topic remained forbidden, not Gaius, not Marcus's deception, not the pain of their separation. I understand now why you couldn't tell me, Livia admitted one evening as they sat in the garden. I might have done the same, fearing the truth would only bring more pain. Understanding doesn't erase the wrong, Marcus replied, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless. By late March, the last of the wounded soldiers had recovered enough to return to their families or military duties. The villa's east wing stood empty once more, though Livia and Marcus agreed it should remain prepared for future need. On the anniversary of Gaius's death, they visited his grave together. Livia placed fresh flowers beside the stone marker while Marcus stood respectfully beside her, acknowledging the man whose sacrifice had shaped both their lives. "He would be proud of what you've built here," Marcus said quietly as they walked back through the cemetery. "Not just the healing center, but the way you've helped so many families face what he couldn't prepare you for." Livia considered this. Perhaps that's how we truly honor those we've lost, by creating something meaningful from the void they leave behind. The following day, Marcus received official visitors, the emperor's representatives bearing news of his formal commendation for heroism during the Dacian campaign and his honorable discharge from active military service. His wounds, while healed, would prevent him from returning to field command. "How do you feel about leaving the legions?" Livia asked that evening, sensing his mixed emotions about this chapter of his life ending. "I've served Rome for 20 years, Marcus replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps it's time to serve something else, such as life rather than death." He gazed around the garden they had created together. "There are other ways to build a legacy besides battlefield glory." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibility. Finally, Marcus turned to face her directly. "Livia Aurelia," he began, his voice carrying the same steady certainty that had once commanded legions. "I have a question I should have asked long ago, not out of duty or arrangement, but from my heart." He reached for her hand, his scarred fingers gentle against her palm. "Will you marry me? Not as my house mistress, but as my wife, my equal, my heart's true companion?" Livia studied his face, the lines of experience around his eyes, the scar along his jaw, the earnest vulnerability so rarely revealed to others. This man who had commanded armies now stood before her without armor, offering not a practical arrangement but a future built on honest love. "Yes," she answered simply. "Not because either of us needs the other's protection or position, but because together we've found something worth building." Their wedding took place in early April, when Rome's gardens burst with color and promise. Unlike the elaborate ceremonies of patrician families, they chose a simple ritual with only those guests who truly mattered, recovered soldiers and their families, neighbors who had benefited from Livia's healing skills, Marcus's loyal comrades, and Cassia, Livia's elderly former neighbor, brought by litter from the Subura at Marcus's insistence. The atrium was transformed with fresh flowers and greenery from their healing garden. Livia wore a stola of deep blue, the same color Marcus had chosen for her first formal garment at the villa, while he dressed not in military regalia but the simple toga of a Roman citizen. As tradition dictated, Livia's hair was parted with a spear point and crowned with a wreath of myrtle, symbolizing love and devotion. Their hands were bound together with a cloth as they recited the ancient words of commitment before witnesses. "Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia." Livia spoke the traditional bride's response, the formal names standing in for their own. The simple ceremony complete, Marcus led his bride to the villa's hearth, the same cold marble he had touched in lonely contemplation on the day he first saw her in the cemetery. Now, the fire burned brightly, symbolizing the warmth and life they had created together. As guests celebrated around them, Marcus drew Livia slightly apart, his voice meant for her alone. "When I returned from war the first time, I had a house but no home," he said, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "You changed that, not through our arrangement, but through your courage, your healing spirit, your willingness to build something new from broken pieces." Livia smiled, thinking of how far they had traveled from their first awkward meeting in the rain-soaked mausoleum. "We've both learned that the greatest battles aren't won on foreign soil, but in our own hearts. And the greatest victories," Marcus added, drawing her close, "come not from conquering others, but from finding the courage to be conquered by love." As evening fell, guests departed with well wishes and small pouches of healing herbs, Livia's gifts to remember the day. The last to leave was Cassia, her gnarled hand gripping Livia's with surprising strength. "I told you life would change your plans," the old woman said with knowing satisfaction. "The gods had this path marked for you all along." When the final guest had gone, Marcus and Livia stood together in the atrium, the house quiet around them but no longer empty. The villa that had once echoed with loneliness now held memories of healing, purpose, and redemption. A fitting home for two souls who had found each other through war's darkness. "My house has found its mistress," Marcus said softly, echoing words spoken long ago with new meaning. Livia completed the thought, her hand finding his. "And both our hearts have found a home."